Welcome back to Viewpoint. I'm joined now from Brisbane by the government's Employment Minister, Brendan O'Connor. Thanks for joining us, Brendan.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chris.
Obviously, you were at the launch today. A big focus on jobs and training, your key area of responsibility. A very Labor message, which is what Kevin Rudd said himself, but I don't think anyone could dispute it, focusing on jobs and training. Why didn't we hear this message 3-4 weeks ago? Why are we waiting to hear it in the shadows of the election?
Well, firstly, we've got a good record on jobs, created almost 1 million jobs and have helped build the economy. I think responded quite properly when confronted by the global financial crisis, which supported 200,000 jobs. I mean, those things are our record. I think we've used the campaign launch quite rightly to focus on jobs and training and apprentices. And to that extent, the Prime Minister was right on message, I think, in terms of what matters most to Australians, and that is investing in skills, investing in education. You're right, it is a Labor goal. It's what Labor does. It builds up the Australian people's skills and education, and I think we've articulated some really good commitments today.
But would you agree you've struggled for a coherent message throughout the election campaign? This is, by your standards, by Labor values, as you say, a good message. I heard Peter Beattie even today saying that he wished you'd come out with this earlier in the campaign.
Well, look, we announced a number of initiatives in this particular area. The Step Into Skills program, a $35 million spend to get foundation skills so that there'll be better completion rates of apprentices. Investment in manufacturing, another $35 million initiative announced by the Prime Minister and the Minister for Industry to move companies from low-tech to high-tech technology, and indeed investment, another initiative, a $30 million initiative to increase the skills in what are the exponentially growing areas of our labour market, that is aged care, disability care. So these have been separate parts announced, but I think it's been pulled together in many respects today by the Prime Minister, who's made very clear that we need to do more to help the TAFE sector. I think we've got a great record, Chris. We've had, of course, the Bradley Review that's led to almost 200,000 new and additional university places. We've had the Gonski Review that's really established the Better Schools plan. The last part of the puzzle, if you like, or the last piece for Labor is, of course, a focus on TAFE and the vet sector, and that was really articulated well by the Prime Minister today.
You are promising a lot more spending, and you are threatening to take over responsibility from the states. Is this a wise move, given that extra spending is your problem? It's got you into so much budgetary strife, and you've had failed attempts really to overrule the states on health. You're trying to do the same on education now. What you really need to be doing is for Canberra to be doing less and spending less.
No, I think it's really important that if we are to spend taxpayers' dollars, as the Commonwealth does, on education and training, then we make sure that that's being spent wisely. And what's happened, and the Prime Minister alluded to this today, what has happened recently is on occasion where we've invested in skills and education, we've had state governments take money out of the sector. And what the Prime Minister made clear today was we'll continue to increase investment in training and apprenticeships because that's vital for our economy and for productivity. But we're not going to stand by and watch Conservative governments, state governments, take money out of the system. And we've seen that happen in Victoria with the Baillieu government, the now Napthine government. We've seen that in Queensland, where Premier Newman has closed down TAFEs. And what we're saying is if we're going to have a compact with state governments, we're not going to allow it to be taken out at the other end.
Kevin Rudd threatened to do the same on health and never followed through.
But there's no doubt. But there's no doubt it's on the record that these governments have been taking hundreds of millions of dollars out of the TAFE sector in the last few years. And what we're saying, and at the same time, we've been increasing our investment. Now, that should not occur in that manner. What we're saying, and what the Prime Minister made very clear, we need to increase investment in apprenticeships and training. No one seems to be disagreeing with that. The Business Council of Australia agree, the AIG agree, the ACTU agree. Businesses and employers want to make sure there's people that have got the skills.
Okay.
But we can't allow for state governments to be pulling money out That's what the Prime Minister was making clear today.
My point is more on credibility, in that Kevin Rudd has threatened similar action in health and we never got there. Sticking on credibility, though, I want to go... The Prime Minister again today insisted on using the idea, the figure of $70 billion, saying that the coalition will have to find $70 billion worth of cuts if it wins government. Now, this is an old figure. Lots has changed since it was used 3 years ago. It's been completely discredited by all sorts of independent arbiters, including political fact-checking websites. It really is a laughable figure, yet the Prime Minister continues to use it. There obviously is a figure he could use, or there's a scare he can raise, but by using the $70 billion figure, isn't he just increasing the lack of credibility for Labor in this campaign, especially after the embarrassment of having to be corrected by the senior public servants last week?
Well, I think as you know, the $70 billion figure was referred to by Mr Hockey and confirmed by Mr Robb
many years ago, and a lot has changed since then, including your own mining tax not producing any money, and all sorts of changes to other savings that have been made and matched, revenue measures.
I'll answer the question if you like, Chris. I'm happy to answer the question.
Sure.
My point is that we can have this argument uphill and down dale. It's not going to matter until Mr Abbott takes the Australian people into his confidence and discloses the details of his savings and spends. And that's a reasonable thing to put. Now, Mr Abbott is now suggesting he's going to wait till Thursday on the eve of the election so that people cannot consider properly and comprehensively the cuts to health, the cuts to education, the cuts effectively to jobs. It's quite valid for us to raise that as a concern. And if indeed you're right, or indeed the coalition are right, that the figure of $70 billion is not the right one, then
it's not me or the coalition, it's the political fact-checking sites and all the independent observers and chief economists from the banks. But look,
how can we do this
cuts
until we get Mr Abbott coming clean? He says he wants the Australian people to trust him, Chris. Why doesn't he trust the Australian people and give them the detail?
Well, absolutely. On that point, let's just refresh our memory of what the Prime Minister said today at the launch about cuts and the coalition.
Why we believe in progressive politics rather than conservative politics. Because we are in the business of building the house up. The Conservatives are in the business of tearing the house down.
Brendan O'Connor, we understand why Labor would want to build the country up, but why do you think that the coalition would possibly want to tear this nation down?
I think the metaphor that was being used by the Prime Minister was to say that when it comes to investing in education and training and apprenticeships, we've got a better record. I mean, what we've seen, for example, even the attempt by Mr Abbott to suggest he was matching us after all of the months and months of complaints on the Better Schools plan. He eventually says he's going to match it, but of course he's not matching it with the same investment. He's doing it over the forward estimates, and so there'll be a deficit in investment in that area.
But there's this rhetoric about the coalition wanting to tear down the nation and hurt families and hurt people. Why would they want to do this? What possible motive would a coalition have to come in and start hurting people? Why would they cut any more than they thought they needed to?
Look, historically, and we can disagree, and I guess our point of view is this, that we believe when it comes to Medicare, when it comes to superannuation, when it comes to the NBN, when it comes to disability care, these things happen under Labor administrations. It may well be that coalition governments of the future may not be able to get rid of them because they become too popular, but they never initiate them, Chris. They don't initiate them. It's always left to Labor administrations to initiate the Medicares, the super, the disability care, the NBN, because we're nation builders. And I don't see that too many iconic things that you can refer to under coalition governments because it's not their way. And I think that was the point that the Prime Minister was making today, quite validly.
Do you believe that governments that break central or core election promises deserve to be re-elected?
Well, I don't know exactly to what you might be referring to, but of course it's always important that you take the Australian people in your confidence.
But it's a general principle. Do governments, if they break central promises, do they deserve to be re-elected?
Well, I don't know what that is, and of course,
well, what about we could try the carbon tax promise?
Let's talk about Mr. Howard. Well, Mr. Howard, it was Mr. Howard that you just reminded me of that. It was sort of Mr. Howard who used to come up with a core and a non-core promise, like he self-defined it. I guess
Mr. Howard's been out of politics since 2007. I'm interested in your case to be re-elected.
Yeah. Yeah, but my point is this, that of course you should take the Australian people into your confidence. There are times in which things do change, and of course there might be times when the governments have to reconsider positions.
Right.
But of course you don't want to have a fundamental breach of faith with the Australian people. Of course that's not the way to proceed.
What about governments who fail every time to deliver on their budget forecasts and their budget promises? Does a government that misses every budget undertaking deserve to be re-elected?
Well, I don't think that's the KPI. To me, the key performance indicators of a government is what is the unemployment figure in that country compared with comparable countries? Where is the economic growth? Where is the building, the jobs? Have we done well on the broader questions? I mean, I'm quite happy to concede, Chris, that we've made mistakes. Every government does. But on the big issues, on the big decisions, when confronted by the biggest economic shock in this world in 80 years, we made the right call. It was Prime Minister Rudd who got us through the global financial crisis, and some people think that I mean, the coalition would like to pretend the GFC didn't happen, but you look around the world. I've sat at the G20 table as the employment minister, and they turn to us and they say what you have done is quite remarkable. Now, that is, I think, in the end, what should be the main things that are assessed by voters, the Australian people, when they make up their mind as to whether, in fact, the government's delivered.
What about a government that has twice considered its own performance so incompetent and dysfunctional that it's torn down its leader and replaced the Prime Minister with someone else? Would a government who does that twice deserve to be re-elected?
Well, you have leadership changes. I think that the Westminster system is a stable system of government, even if there are changes of leader. And indeed, of course, the opposition has had 4 changes of leader since the 2007 election. So you can have a stable system even with changes. I mean, can I say, would we prefer those things not to happen? Yes, but I would also argue that in all of that time we have focused on the most important things that matter to the Australian people, and that is why we have low inflation, we have low unemployment, we have good economic growth, and we have very low debt relative to the rest of the OECD world.
All right, just briefly, if you lose the election, should Kevin Rudd stay in Parliament, or would the Labor Party be better off seeing him leave Parliament and rebuilding around a new leadership team?
Honestly, after today, I'm not thinking about losing the election. I think the Prime Minister really gave us a shot in the arm today, focused on those things that mattered. We're going into this week believing we can win. Mr Abbott might think he's already won. Well, I think that's what the Australian people will mark you down on. I'm not thinking about losing at this point, Chris. I'm thinking about us having a chance on the 7th of September.
All right, Brendan O'Connor.
The Australian people, give us a chance.
All right, a very optimistic Brendan O'Connor there. Thanks very much for joining us from Brisbane.